Welcome, dear students, to a new presentation, this time on the social history of the age of Chaucer, that is from 1350 to 1400. The presentation is titled The Age of Chaucer, a Survey. Now, this is meant for the first semester English core paper 1 students of the new FYUGP. Now, this is about the social history, the important events and developments of that period between 1350 to 1400, which had great impact on life and writing, on life and literature. Now, we know this is part of the Middle English period, actually. The Middle English period is from 1066, that is the Norman conquest, to 1500, that is the Renaissance. In between, we have certain phases. Now, these phases are up to 1250, we call it the period of religious record. From 1250 to 1350, period of religious and secular writing. 1350 to 1400, that's our slide, our presentation. 1350 to 1400 is called the age of great individual writers, or the age of Chaucer, from Geoffrey Chaucer, the first great modern poet in English literature. From 1400 to 1500, of course, it's called the age of transition. So this presentation will cater to that particular 50 years. The span is of 50 years, 1350 to 1400, the age of Chaucer. So let's get into the slides and see the important social and literary events of the period. Literary in the sense that the social events will have an impact on the literary output of the period. Now, the first important event which happens at the threshold of the age of Chaucer is what is called the Black Death. It happens in 1348-49. So actually the age of Chaucer, which starts in 1350, is ushered in by this Black Death. Now, what is this Black Death? Now, Black Death is an epidemic, and I'm sure you are quite familiar with what an epidemic or a pandemic is from our experience of the COVID-19 pandemic recently. Now, this Black Death is a plague, a bubonic plague spread by fleas on rats. Now, the medieval period, in all societies actually, were vulnerable to such pandemics because of unhygienic conditions, lack of medical facilities, and ignorance of the people. Now, this particular pandemic happened in 1348-49. The medieval period as a whole saw these spread of these pandemics in Europe, Asia, and other parts of the world. Now, we are concerned with this particular plague which happened in England in 1348-49. It's called the Black Death, from the black patches that are formed on the skins of the victims. Now, this Black Death is important because it caused a lot of devastation. Almost a quarter of the population, if not more, succumbed to this plague, succumbed to this epidemic. This impact on population had far-reaching consequences on the social life of the people, economic life of the people, and also the literature. Now, the most affected people in this pandemic were first of all, the clergy, the priest, who were duty-bound to actually tend to the suffering multitude. So they got infected. Plus the poor people, the serfs, the peasants were most vulnerable as well to the pandemic. Now, this decrease in population, especially in the case of the peasants, is something which will have a bearing on the whole socio-economic life of the period. So keep in mind, the first important event of the age of Chaucer is what happened just at the beginning, just as the age of Chaucer is coming up, the Black Death. A very important development of the age of Chaucer is that here we witness the disintegration of feudalism. The medieval period is a period of feudalism, actually. The system of giving land for services is what is prevalent throughout Europe. And this is brought to England, we know, after the Norman conquest. William the Conqueror introduced this system of giving land for services in the English society. Now, just as we see the rise of feudalism in the Middle English period, we also witness its plummeting. We also witness its decline or its disintegration. Now, how does this happen? There would be many factors, but a very important factor, of course, is the Black Death itself, of which we referred to in our previous slide. Now, the Black Death we said the most important aspect of the Black Death is that the population of the peasants declined. This is very significant as far as the disintegration of feudalism is concerned. Now, how that is so? Now, power equation changes post the Black Death, after the Black Death. Power equation between whom? The lord and the peasant, lord and the serf. The bargaining power now was no longer with the lord, it shifted to the hands of the peasants. Now, as the number of peasants decreased, this happened. Prior to the Black Death, the whip hand was in the hands of the lords. They were in control. They could dictate terms. The peasants had to conform to the rules and regulations set by the lord. They had no other option because their population was high. If one refused to work in a lord's land under the conditions set down by the feudal lord, there would be 100 others waiting in the queue to take his place. So they had to oblige. They had to conform to the their serfdom. But the Black Death came as a turning point. As the number of peasants went down, their demand increased. The demand increased in the sense that the lords were now more and more dependent on the peasant, because there was now not plentiful of peasants to look up to. If one declined to work under the conditions set down by the lord, it was difficult for the lord to find a replacement. So he had to more and more actually give in to the demands of the peasants. And as a result, what happened was that the peasants began to demand better conditions, better facilities. And they were no longer satisfied with their status as serfs, as peasants bound to the soil with very little freedom. They now demanded money wages. And if the lords declined to give them their freedom, they actually ran away. They opted out of the agreement, and they could be free laborers, or they could run away to some other farm where the lord would be more, you could say, charitable, or lord would be ready to obliging. Now, this led to the growth of a group of free laborers. Plus, as land was now in large quantities and the number of peasants was small, some peasants now had more lands under their control. They also became small farmers, not just peasants, with land of their own. This led to the growth of the yeoman class. So the disintegration of feudalism brought about a radical change in the society. We know the Middle Ages is characterized by the presence of three estates: the aristocracy, the clergy, and the serfs. Now, in the age of Chaucer, we see the development of the fourth estate, that is the middle class. This is a very significant development of the age of Chaucer. Now, the Black Death had a direct connection with the disintegration of feudalism, as we have seen in the previous slide. Now comes another event. Now, this age of Chaucer, we shall see over these slides, that it's an age of discontent, age of protest. You will see a number of protest poems, protest literature too, in this particular age. Now, this is the peasants' revolt. These peasants revolted in 1381. Of course, it did not happen overnight. The culmination was the revolt which took place in 1381. It was brewing actually over a period of time since the Black Death. The root cause of this revolt was the conflict between the peasants and the lords, as we have already seen. The immediate cause was an unpopular tax levied on the peasants to fund the 100 Years' War with France, which ran from 1337 to 1453. So this was also the age of war, of turbulence, of hurly-burly. And the poll tax was something which the peasants resented. They revolted against it. They protested against it. And also they demanded higher wages. Their wages were sought to be restricted by the powers that be, and at the same time they were levied with more and more taxes. So it was natural that there would be discontent and rebellion. Now the lords tried to suppress the demand for higher wages through their clout in the parliament, in the government. So they got passed many laws to restrict the wages of the laborers, called the statutes of laborers. So, it was an age where there was intense conflict and discontent, and it rose to a rebellion in 1381. And the leaders of this peasants' revolt were John Ball, Wat Tyler, and Jack Straw. The revolt was, of course, suppressed, it was quelled, but all the same, it was the beginning of the end of the feudal system. It was the beginning of a new age of more freedom. Next, a very pertinent point to be made here is that this is the age in which we see, in a way, the beginning of the Reformation. Just as we see the beginning of the Renaissance already in the poetry of Chaucer, we also see the beginning of the Reformation in the work of John Wycliffe and his followers, called the Lollards. Now, John Wycliffe protested against the corruption of the clergy, and you will see in the literature of the period satiric references to the corrupt clergymen. And John Wycliffe, of course, is called the Morning Star of Reformation precisely because of that. Now, you should remember, in the European context as a whole, it is in this age, that is in 1378, there was this event or the development called the Great Schism. Actually, there were two popes who were elected, one in Italy, the other in France. Now, this is an evidence of the state of the church in Europe as a whole. And this corruption, power struggle was there in England as well. And the clergy were actually distracted from the holy calling. They were involved in corrupt practices, and people were protesting. And the leader among them, of course, was John Wycliffe, who, of course, is also important as someone who translated or had a part in the translation of the Bible from Latin. As far as the language goes, this is the most important period of the Middle English age, Middle English period. It is in this period we see the supremacy of the English language being revived. Now, when the Normans came in 1066 and established their rule, the obvious consequence was that the English language, the Old English language, lost its prestige and position. The ruling classes, the elites, spoke Norman French language. English was spoken only by the common people. So English was no longer the main language. But with time, of course, and certain dates are really important. In 1204, the Normans lose Norman. After that, they began to consider England as their country, not just a colony or an extension. So they began to adopt and absorb everything about England, about its way of life, about its culture. They adopted more and more the English language. Now, so there was a bilingual situation for a time, and still further we will see the blending of Old English and Norman French and the development of what is called the Middle English language. Now, this Middle English language, of course, is a development of the Old English language itself, but heavily influenced by the Norman French language, especially in its vocabulary. Though in other areas also the influence can be seen. Now, these dates are very important as far as the standardization of the English language is concerned. We already referred to 1204, which comes before the age of Chaucer, but that is a significant age because from then on, the Normans start taking an interest in the English language and they start speaking the English language. In 1350, that is at the beginning of the age of Chaucer, English returns to school. That's a big event actually for the language. In 1362, English is used in the law courts, and in 1399, Henry IV addresses Parliament in English. So the resurgence of English is complete now. This is a very important aspect of the age of Chaucer. The social history, the linguistic history, the literary history cannot be discussed without actually considering this supremacy of the English language. Then, of course, as we have already said, this particular is 1350 to 1400. We call it the age of great individual writers. This period, this 50 years, is a mind-blowing period as far as literary productions are concerned. We have not only Geoffrey Chaucer, the first modern English poet, we have William Langland and John Gower. It is called the age of great individual writers because prior to this period, we hardly have any names actually. The literature that was there was the folk literature. Individual writers were not many. In this particular period, small space of 50 years, we see the flowering of a number of great writers. Prominent among them were, of course, Chaucer, Gower, and Langland. It is their poetry that will reflect the society of the times. So your objective should be to, first of all, survey, as we are doing, the age of Chaucer as far as its social history is concerned, and then connect the social history to the literary output of the period, how the literature mirrors the society of the time, be it in Chaucer, be it in Langland, be it in Gower. For example, we talked about the Peasants' Revolt. This peasant revolt you will find reflected, although in a mocking tone, in the Nun's Priest Tale of Chaucer. There will be references to the Peasants' Revolt in Gower as well. So that is what we should do. Connect the two, the social history and the literary output. We said the Middle Ages or the age of Chaucer is the beginning of the Reformation. The seeds of the Reformation were sown in this age. The germ of the Reformation can be seen in the age of Chaucer. Similarly, the germ of the Renaissance can also be seen in the age of Chaucer. That is why the age of Chaucer is very important. The beginnings of two very revolutionary developments in society, the Reformation and the Renaissance. For the first time, we see a modern note here in the poetry of the period and also of the in the people's attitudes. That modern note we already saw in Wycliffe's questioning of the church. Medieval period taught us to obey the church, obey religion, and to suffer. It is the Renaissance, which was a consequence of the revival of interest in Greek and Latin culture that brought before us a new attitude, a new world, where we were encouraged to inquire, to question, and also to enjoy. This modern note, the spirit of inquiry, interest in this life, leads to the growth of humanism. So humanism has its beginnings. Renaissance has its beginnings, just as Reformation has its beginnings in the age of Chaucer. Now, if we are to conclude, if we are to summarize the age of Chaucer, how are we to do so? Perhaps we could say that this is, I have already said so, in fact, in one of the initial slides, this is an age of social, political, and cultural ferment. A lot of agitation was there, a lot of activity actually, socially, politically, and culturally. The 100 Years' War, the Peasants' Revolt, the growth of Middle English, all this. And then this was an age of discontent and protest. We saw the Peasants' Revolt again, discontent because of the poll tax, because of the conditions imposed upon the peasants, also because of the Black Death and the sufferings. And then, of course, standardization of the English language, very important as far as the age of Chaucer is concerned, and the phenomenal literary output in the hands of people like Chaucer, Langland, and Gower. So that was a survey of the age of Chaucer with the focus on socialism. Social history, of course, as we know, cannot be kept in a watertight compartment. It is always connected with the economic history and the political history. But our focus here is the social history without totally dispensing with the economic and the political. So we have got an idea of the social history of the period of age of Chaucer. Now, in our subsequent slides, we shall try to connect the social history of the period with the literary output. So I hope this slide has been or will be of help to you in understanding the age of Chaucer. And we would meet again in this kind of virtual classes to actually connect the social history of the period with the literary outputs. So thank you once again.